ABC's Manny Medrano is at the Supreme Court.
Justice Stevens said Congress could act to allow for medical marijuana use. She will be one of the 9 justices sitting.
Please help me welcome Manny Medrano.
Character is an attribute that I've been very fortunate to have been introduced to from a very young age. I take a huge cut in pay and I become a federal prosecutor and assistant United States attorney. And there the drug dealers proceeded to torture Enrique Camarena for about 36 hours nonstop. And he says, Manny, I've got bad news. We've learned there's a contract out on your life. There was this one fellow I convicted who walks into a Bank of America, robs a bank. By the time he gets home, LAPD is waiting for him because, you see, he left his wallet on the counter. You need to teach your kids to have the courage to try something and to fail. This is the impact that you have on your kids every day. You make a difference. My friends, as a network correspondent for ABC News based out of Washington, D.C., it is my privilege, it's my honor to cover the United States Supreme Court. And I deem it a privilege and an honor because of what the High Court represents for me. And what it stands for, simply stated, is character. Think about it. These 9 men and women Supreme Court justices appointed for life by the President of the United States, it is their job, it is their function to define the laws, to interpret this magnificent document called the United States Constitution, and in so doing, they define the rights of every man, woman, and child in this great country of ours. And I don't know about you, but for me, that takes character. Character is an attribute that I've been very fortunate to have been introduced to from a very young age, thanks largely in part to a woman. Her name is Elisa. Elisa's 74 years old. She's originally from Chihuahua, Mexico. She resides in the Southwest, and she's my mother. And many years ago, with a 6th grade education, she leaves Mexico, and carrying my older sister Maria in her arms, she crosses the raging waters of the Rio Grande, settles in West Texas, becomes a U.S. citizen, marries my father. They have 4 kids. When I was 7, my folks divorced, and although I was raised by my mother, I saw a lot of my dad. And when I was growing up in the Southwest, we were always below the poverty line, always seemingly just a step ahead of the bill collectors. I remember one time, just for the heck of it, I sat down and figured out that like in 13 years in West Texas, I lived in 12 different apartments or barrios or slums, more accurately. We moved around so much, I grew up thinking I was a child of a diplomat. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. By show of hands, anyone here from El Paso? You rock. El Paso, a good place to grow up. Family, very important for me. I have to take just a quick moment to tell you about one of my favorite relatives there. This was my Aunt Lola. My tia Lola, God bless her, she's gone now. This was my mother's older sister. And I would usually run into my tia Lola at family functions. I remember one time I'm home in El Paso visiting from college, and I'm single, by the way, at the time. Something about which my Aunt Lola always gave me a hard time about. Anyway, I run into her at a wedding. She comes up to me at the reception. She pokes me in the ribs and she cackles. Manuelito, you're next. And she laughed like it was the funniest thing she ever heard. A few months later, same thing happens. I run into my tia Lola at another wedding. She comes up to me and she pokes me and she says, Manny, you're next. Well, after a while, it started getting kind of old, but I finally got her to stop. I started telling her the same thing at funerals. After I graduate from Thomas Jefferson High School in El Paso, Texas, I'm now on a plane and on my way to Harvard University. And this was an experience because, you see, I'd never been out of the Southwest. I'd never been on an airplane. I remember mid-flight, the flight attendant comes by and says, would you like a Coca-Cola? And I'm such a turnip, I've never flown. I go, well, how much does it cost? And she says, oh, soft drinks are free. And I go, oh? Free? Never use the word free around an 18-year-old Chicano fresh off the boat. So I say, bring them on, baby. So I start knocking down these Coca-Colas. Then the flight attendant comes by with these little bags of nuts. And folks, I'm not talking about these puny bags you get on today's Spartan flights. I'm talking about back then in the 70s, man, a veritable cornucopia of fancy nuts. Pecans, cashews, macadamia nuts. Did you know I'd never seen a macadamia nut before in my entire life? So before you know it, I've drank about a gallon of Coca-Cola, eaten about a pound of these fancy nuts. My plane is descending into Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. I turn to the businessman on my right, I smile, and I throw up on his lap. I arrive at Harvard Yard. I need a job. I get the highest paying job I can get, $3.25 an hour dorm crew. That means I have the privilege of cleaning the bathrooms for upperclassmen at Harvard College. And honestly, I got a lot of razzing from my white, preppy classmates at Harvard because I was cleaning toilets. But you know what? I didn't care because, well, I needed the money for books and tuition. But I realized intuitively, even then at that young age, that there's dignity in any work as long as you give 110%. And there's another thing I understood as well, even then at that very young age. I knew that this toilet cleaning job, for me, it was just a way station on my way to my ultimate dream or goal, which was to become a trial attorney. But when I was at Harvard, I kept my eyes open. And I observed for the first time in my life power and wealth and status, and I realized that I wanted a piece of that pie because, let's be honest, poverty is a great motivator. So I figured to get my piece of the pie, I would have to emulate a select few of my classmates. So for the next 4 years at Harvard College, I basically turned into a jerk. So obnoxious, so offensive, thought I knew it all. Then I started Harvard Law School. That was brutal. 50% divorce rate at my graduating class at the Harvard Law School. In first year of law school, you do moot court competition, so I'm matched up against this young guy from South Carolina, easygoing demeanor, casual attire, thick Southern accent. I am embarrassed to share with you that behind his back I used to make fun of this guy because I'm thinking that based on appearances alone, I'm going to demolish this guy. Then the competition begins. And I get my opponent's legal brief, and it was the most beautifully written document I'd ever read. Then my opponent stands up right here to give his oral argument. He proceeds to give the most elegant, lucid, cogent argument I'd ever heard. And I'm thinking, this guy is just 21 years old. Well, needless to say, my opponent crushed me in that moot court competition. But I took away a powerful lesson because I realized for the first time that I really didn't know what success was. Oh, I thought I did. I thought success was how much money am I going to make, what kind of car am I going to drive, and I thought to achieve success, had to have an attitude, had to be pompous and arrogant and pretentious. But now I realize for the first time that truly successful people in life, I think, have the confidence, the clarity of mind to be subtle and unpretentious and kind and generous, and I vowed from that day forward, that I would endeavor to emulate my young friend from South Carolina. And there's another reason I share this story with you, because it was, for me, my first exposure to my own prejudices, my own stereotypes, and the lack of appreciation of the power and vitality of diversity. When I looked at my friend from South Carolina, and I'm ashamed to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, I saw a hick from the South with a Southern drawl. I thought I was going to kill him because he didn't fit my mind's eye of what a trial lawyer was supposed to look like. And thank goodness he kicked my butt, because that's when I realized for the first time that great lawyers, great professionals in any field can come from all walks of life, from all forms of diverse backgrounds. I mentioned I grew up in El Paso, Texas. I love El Paso. But with the benefit of hindsight, I realize now that back then when I grew up in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, the city was de facto segregated. If you've ever been to El Paso, it's at the western tip of the state of Texas. The Rio Grande River snakes through that neck of the woods. South of the river is Mexico. To the north of the river is El Paso, Texas. And then the city is divided by a mountain range called the Franklin Mountains that runs north and south. On the west side of the mountain is where all the whites live. On the east side of the mountain is where all the Mexican kids live. That's where I live. And I'm thinking, how did I get here? Why was I able to get here? And I'll tell you why. I'll give you a good example of that. Mr. Milan Swambera. Mr. Sombera was my orchestra teacher in junior high and high school in El Paso. This is a guy who was a fabulous violist, a fabulous violinist. This is a guy who immigrated from Czechoslovakia, settled in El Paso, and year after year produced the finest high school orchestra in the state of Texas, a bunch of poor Mexican kids. Every year he sent more kids to all-state competitions than any other high school in the state of Texas. Again, nothing but a group of Mexican kids. And this is a guy who could have taught at any white affluent school district in the state of Texas. He chose to stay in El Paso, and I love this man, and I hated him sometimes because he drove me so hard. Man, we butt heads all the time, but I understand why now. Because Mr. Sombera, like many of you in this convention center today, would settle for nothing less than 100% of your best effort. And candidly, I would not be here today but for the kindness and generosity of people like Mr. Milan Sombera. After I graduate from the Harvard Law School, I'm now on a plane again. This time I'm on my way to Los Angeles, California. I joined a big law firm in Beverly Hills. I'm working hard, making money, life is good. But after 2 years, I realized I had to leave. And the reason was I wasn't getting to try cases. So much to my father's chagrin, I take a huge cut in pay and I become a federal prosecutor and assistant United States attorney. And can I tell you something? And how many of us in this room have felt this way when we embark on a new chapter in our personal and professional endeavors? I was so scared. Because what if I wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't cut it as a trial lawyer? When you're a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles for your first trials, you cut your teeth on bank robbery cases. You may not know this. LA, bank robbery capital of the world. 1 year alone, there was over 2,600 bank robberies in Southern California. And the thing about bank robbers in Southern California, they are not the sharpest tools in the shed. There was this one fellow I convicted who walks into a Bank of America, robs a bank. By the time he gets home, LAPD is waiting for him because, you see, he left his wallet on the counter. And there was another fellow I convicted who walks into another B of A, this time in South Central Los Angeles, puts a gun to the face of an 8.5-month pregnant teller. She has the presence of mind to give him bait money in this thing called a die pack. And man, these things are so cool because the way they work is they explode or detonate electronically when taken outside the perimeter of the bank, and they spew this indelible dye all over the place. It's an incredible mess. Anyway, the bank robber flees. Outside you hear this loud kaboom! LAPD arrives to find this bank robber writhing on the ground in agony. Well, it turns out that bank robber, before he fled, he took that die pack and shoved it down the front of his pants. What a knucklehead. I tried a lot of cases as a federal prosecutor, but the one that I'm perhaps most proud of involved a DEA agent by the name of Enrique Camarena. Enrique Camarena was a federal drug agent assigned to the DEA office in Guadalajara, Mexico. And one day, February 7th, 1985, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Enrique Camarena walks out of the DEA office, which was in the American consulate in Guadalajara. He was going to have lunch with his wife. They were going to go eat Chinese food. And outside in broad daylight and at gunpoint, drug dealers and corrupt Mexican cops kidnap Enrique Camarena. They take him to this palatial home on the outskirts of Guadalajara, and they put him in the small room in the back of the house, a room that had walls that were about a foot thick, the better to muffle the screams. And there the drug dealers proceeded to torture Enrique Camarena for about 36 hours nonstop. And then they killed him. The death blow was they got a piece of steel rebar or a tire iron. To this day, we're still not sure. And they drove it through the top of his skull right here, killing him instantly. Enrique Camarena, age 36, federal drug agent, hero. Left behind a wife and 3 kids. When I was in charge of the Enrique Camarena murder case, one day I got the news that frankly I'd been expecting for a long time, but nevertheless didn't want to hear. It comes in the form of a knock on my door, 14th floor, U.S. Attorney's Office, downtown federal courthouse. In walks a supervisory DEA agent. He says, "Manny, I've got bad news. We've learned there's a contract out on your life." And so it began. 24-hour U.S. Marshal protection. I was trained to be proficient with a firearm. I carried a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver with a 2.5-inch barrel. I got a permit to carry a concealed weapon. And life was very, very difficult, if not surreal. I remember one time I'm burning the midnight oil, getting ready for a trial in the Enrique Camarena murder case. It's late, it's time to go home, so my 2 bodyguards are driving me home. And as we're driving, it dawns on me, I have no food in the apartment. So we stop at All Night Market, and I get out pushing my little shopping cart, followed by my 2 big, burly, armed-to-the-teeth deputy U.S. Marshals. These guys look like something out of Central Casting. And I'm quickly going up and down the aisles because I'm tired, I'm hungry, I want to go home. I come to the cereal section, scanning the shelves, looking for what I want. There it is. I bend over, and I put my hand on a box of Cheerios. Suddenly, my bodyguard barks out, "Put that down!" Startled, I throw down the box of Cheerios. I stand up. I draw my .357 Magnum revolver. I am looking for an assassin. Is there a bomb on the premises? Time is literally standing still. I look up at my bodyguard. He says, "Manny, don't buy that name brand. Buy this generic brand." Tastes the same, it's cheaper. You get more bang for your buck. And I swear the whole time I'm thinking, how much prison time would I get for shooting a deputy U.S. Marshal? Can I just wing the guy? I'm so fortunate. I've had 2 very gratifying careers. I was a trial lawyer for 13 years. I tried 60 jury trials, never lost a case. Thank you. Thank you. But then I had a chance to do something different with my life, so I had the opportunity to go into broadcast journalism. Next thing you know, I'm hired away by Channel 4 KNBC, local news here in LA, baby. Worked there for 10 years, so I'm the legal reporter, and despite the many promises of management, they hadn't trained me, so I'm frustrated. So I go to the news director, I say, "Mark, you promised to train me." He says, "Manny, I'm sorry, I've been busy. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp." The next day, an executive producer comes to fetch me. She takes me to the newsroom camera, and you've all seen this in a newscast. A reporter at a desk, and behind him or her, you see the station's logo and the frenetic activity of the newsroom. Anyway, she sits me down, she gives me this earpiece, it's called an IFB, shows me where to plug in the cable. That way the producer of the show can talk to me in my ear during the actual newscast, okay? So now the producer says, "Okay, Manny, you ready?" "You bet." "You relaxed?" "Okay. Manny, you see that little camera about 6 feet in front of you?" "All righty." "See that little red light just above the camera lens?" "Okay." "Well, Manny, when that red light comes on, there's several million people watching. So just start talking, okay?" And then she walked away. Man, I was mortified. I almost had a heart attack. Training, there was no training. But in life, like in television, timing is everything, because 4 months after I'm hired, O.J. Simpson is accused of killing his ex-wife and her male friend. Now I'm on the air every day for hours at a time doing legal analysis in our gavel-to-gavel of the O.J. Simpson case. And it's one of the first pretrial hearings on, remember Judge Lancito, the judge in that case? Remember the Dancinitos from the Leno show? I'm sorry, that was some funny stuff, okay? Anyway, so Lancito's allowed a camera in the courtroom, and then there's one of the countless and insufferable sidebars. You remember the sidebars where the lawyers would meet privately with the judge next to the bench? So there's a sidebar. Camera starts, okay, with a wide shot. Starts to pan in slowly, gradually, inexorably, onto O.J. Simpson, who at this very moment has this pensive expression on his face. He's just off staring into space. The silence is deafening. It is a magnificent television moment. That's when the anchor says, "Manny, at this very moment, what's going on in O.J.'s mind?" Well, how should I know? Well, another time I'm doing legal analysis in our gavel-to-gavel coverage of the O.J. trial. The trial's begun. I've been at the newsroom camera all day doing legal analysis, so I'm tired, I'm hungry, my brain is fried, I want to go home. It's a commercial break. Producer talks to me in my earpiece. She says, Manny, if I come back to you, I need you to stretch to get me to the commercial break. Well, to stretch is a TV news term, meaning that if they do come back to you, talk, stretch, get us to the commercial break. I didn't know that. My first reaction is, dude, what a benevolent employer, so concerned about my physical well-being. And now that you mention it, I am kind of tight, so I start stretching this way, and I start stretching that way. And coincidentally, my wife, Rosa, at this time was taking yoga, so she taught me this really cool yoga pose. I think she called it the triangle pose. Triangle pose. So now check this out. Now I'm in the triangle pose. I'm stretching this way, I'm stretching that way. And I don't know about you, but when I stretch and it feels really good, I start to moan. Okay? So now I'm in the triangle pose. I'm stretching this way, I'm stretching that way. My eyes are closed. I am moaning. I'm like, moaning like a dog in heat. Suddenly the anchor shouts in my earpiece, Manny! I open my eyes and that little red light is on. At this very moment, okay, millions of Americans watching Manny Medrano make a complete fool of himself. Man, I'm mortified. I unlock myself from my pretzel position. I answer the anchor's question. I think it had something to do with double jeopardy. I'm not sure. The whole thing was so dramatic, I've literally blocked it out. Mercifully, the day comes to an end, and I walk straight from the newsroom camera to the NBC parking lot without talking to a soul. I'm driving home. I'm near tears. What have I done? They're going to fire me. What in the world made me think I could cut it in this TV business? And, oh, dear Lord, my wife, Rosa, stayed home from work today so she could watch and critique me on television. What am I going to tell her? I don't even remember driving home. I parked the car in Glendale where we live. I walk into the house looking like something a cat dragged down. And there's Rosa. She comes up to me, gives me this big bear hug, and she says, well, I see you almost have that triangle pose down. We're divorced now. Kidding. Just kidding. I laughed, she laughed. It was actually kind of funny. I felt a little better. I was able to go to sleep that night. The next day, I went back to NBC. Miraculously, I wasn't fired. I got back into the hot seat at the newsroom camera. I continued with my legal analysis. I continued to improve. And I'm very, very proud to share with you that I was awarded an Emmy for my coverage of the O.J. Simpson case. And I'm very, very proud of that. But my friends, as educators, there's another reason I share this story with you, because I think so often fear of failure can paralyze us, but we shouldn't let this happen, because failure, I think, is a magnificent teacher. It lets us learn from our mistakes so we can try again and finally prevail. Failure, I think, gives us, it's like these building blocks, to build a foundation, something to stand on. My mother showered us with a love that at times just took my breath away. But beyond that, my mother fostered an environment in my household that failure was permissible. My mother used to say, Manny, it's okay to fail. It's not okay if you never even try. So my friends, both in your personal and professional endeavors, give yourself permission to fail. But more importantly, you do two magnificent things as educators. One, you teach what you know. But second, you need to teach your kids to have the courage to try something and to fail. And you tell them that Manny Medrano said that if you took aside the people that you admire the most in life and you ask them, how did you get here today? How did you do it? They will all respond in the same way. They will say, I mark my success not by the quantity of successes I've had in life, but by the failures along the way, and more importantly, what I took away and learned from those failures to be a better person. You're looking at one of the luckiest guys on God's earth. I was a lawyer. Got this TV gig. It's pretty cool, pretty bitchin', not gonna lie. But I got to tell you, There are downsides to being a TV reporter and a network correspondent. For one, you may not know this, the deadlines are extraordinary. We turn these stories over the same day in a matter of hours. Unbelievably stressful. And another downside to my job is that so many of the stories that I cover are horribly tragic. Man, I mean horribly tragic. You see terrible things as a TV reporter and a network correspondent. Terrible things. I've been there for all these things. A commercial airliner goes down. An earthquake, a fire, a flood, a riot, a train derails. Terrible things. And you take these things home with you. And you lie awake at night and you see the faces and the blood and the carnage. And it weighs you down. It weighs me down. And after a while you think, you know what? No mas, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot cover these stories anymore. And that's when it happens. When you least expect it. You see it with your own two eyes, man. A flicker of light over here, a ray of hope over there, and you know what it is, you know what I'm talking about. You see it every day in your kids. It's the human spirit. Indefatigable, irrepressible. Let me explain. I covered a story once in Compton, California. There was a gang drive-by shooting, and a stray bullet from an AR-15 semi-automatic assault rifle travels more than 400 feet down a residential street, greater than the length of a football field. The bullet goes through a fence and enters a home where at that very moment a man by the name of Eligio Reyes, his wife Laura, and their 3-year-old daughter Celeste are watching television. Bullet comes into the living room, goes through the brain of the mother, killing her instantly. Bullet ricochets off a bookcase, ends up in the heart of the 3-year-old. She dies instantly. Eligio Reyes saw his wife and daughter die in front of him. In a millisecond, his reasons for living were wiped off the face of the earth. I covered this story from the beginning, the day of the shooting, the arrest and conviction of the shooter. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But that day at the sentencing hearing at the Compton courthouse, 5th floor, I went up to Mr. Reyes because I had a question for this man, a question that had been burning a hole in my gut, in my belly, from day one of this horrific story. Mr. Reyes, I asked, in Spanish, how, sir, have you been able to deal with such a terrible loss? You know, I wanted to try to grasp this, to understand it, to somehow be able to wrap my arms around it. Mr. Reyes looked at me and he said words I will never forget as long as I live. He said, I may have lost the life I had, but I have not lost the will to live. And you know, man, I find very interesting, and maybe this has happened to you, how sometimes at a certain moment in time you notice things that you normally wouldn't observe. Because I noticed as Mr. Reyes spoke to me, I noticed the people that were with him, his families and his supporters. I noticed that they were all touching him in one way or another. I remember one person had a hand on his arm, a second person had an arm around his shoulder, a third person was gently caressing his face as he spoke to me. And this was a life moment for me. This was a life-altering event, because I realized at that very moment, 5th floor Compton Courthouse, I knew 100% in my heart, unequivocally, that Eligio Reyes was going to make it. I share this story with you because despite the horrific nature of the facts, it represents everything that for me is extraordinary and magnificent and wonderful about our humanity. Think about it for a second. Point one, love of family, support of friends. Mr. Reyes suffered a loss that I can't even begin to comprehend. And the only way he was able to pull through, the only way he was able to survive was through the love and support and family and friends, which I think necessarily begs the question for all of us here in this convention center today. Are you doing everything you need to be doing to nourish relationships, to fix friendships, to mend fences? Because as sure as the sunrise tomorrow, if it hasn't happened to you yet, crisis is going to slam into you with tsunami-like force, and the only way you're going to be able to pull through, the only way you're going to be able to survive is through the love and support of family and friends. And a related topic, I was speaking to someone backstage right now about this. Mentorship. You teach, but you know what? Perhaps more importantly, you mentor. You need to identify and lock and load on those few precious kids that need your greatest help. Because again, if you ask anyone who's successful, and I ask them all the time, because I meet all kinds of successful people, how did you get here? And they'll tell you exactly the same thing. I would not be here today but for the kindness and the generosity and magnanimity of mentors and teachers and educators who guided me along my long and difficult road. And the second incredible thing about this story of Mr. Reyes, who on that fateful day in Compton lost his wife and child, it's this irrepressible, unassailable, unabating human spirit. Again, he suffers a loss that I don't understand. I have two boys, 7 and 10. If this were to happen to me, I think I'd go home to Vienna, Virginia, lock the door, curl up in a fetal position in a corner and never come out again, because I don't know if I could survive. I don't know if I could pull through it. But Mr. Reyes did. Because he understood intuitively that that's what he had to do. He understood intuitively that's what his wife and child would have wanted him to do. And it is this amazing human spirit that it is my privilege to bear witness to every day as an adjunct law professor, as a trial lawyer, as a broadcast journalist. I see it every day in our humanity. I see it in our kids, our school kids, and mainly, my friends, I see it in you. I saw it in Mr. Swambera, my orchestra teacher, junior high, high school, great instrumentalist from Czechoslovakia, settles in West Texas, teaches nothing but Mexican kids, produces the finest high school orchestras in the state, could have worked anywhere he wanted, but he chose to stay there. And I would not be here but for Mr. Swambera or countless other people in my life, my teachers in El Paso, Mr. George Leon, my third grade orchestra teacher at Alta Vista Elementary School in El Paso, Texas, Mr. Lee, my science teacher, junior high, Henderson Junior High, Ms. Gleason, my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Jorian, my high school counselor. The list goes on and on. 12 years ago, Mr. Swambera, my orchestra teacher, long retired, I tracked him down. And I wrote him a 3-page, single-spaced letter telling him what I was doing with my life, but mainly to thank him. To thank him for everything that he had done for me. And about 3 years ago, he passed away, and at his funeral service, scores of his former students showed up. And the letter that I wrote was read aloud during the funeral service. This is the impact that Mr. Swambera had on me. This is the impact that you have on your kids every day. And tomorrow or the next day when you're having a rotten day, because we all have them, you take this Manny Medrano core message to heart. Because, my friends, you make a difference. You make a difference. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for what you do every day. It has been a privilege to have been invited to join you this morning. Good luck and God bless. Thank you.